As I continue reading the book What Doesn't Kill Us by Stephen Joseph, Ph.D., I get better and better understanding of what trauma is and how to deal with it. And as this podcast is not exactly about trauma, but it's about resilience. So why do I read about trauma? It's because I believe that resilience is defined by how you deal with traumatic or just stressful situations, because that's the definition of resilience. And so today I would like to talk to you about what I've read so far, and as the best way of learning is to teach. And so today I will try to give you my understanding and my simplified understanding of the book and how to deal with trauma, or of course just any kind of stressful situation. Because I believe that one of ways to become more resilient is through daily or basically constant usage of your resilience skills. However, I believe that many people are just afraid. We are afraid of exposing ourselves to failure because we, frankly, don't know how to deal with it. So I'm sure you've had these situations in your life when you knew that you should do something, right? And it was not guaranteed. The success was not guaranteed. And then you didn't do it. And I'm sure that you even now regret not having done that. Like in my case, when I had a chance to start my own school, I took the chance, and I think it was because I was prepared. I was over-prepared for any possible negative outcomes. So in my case, it was the same year that my son had cancer, and due to cancer, he lost his eye. And at that time, I was like, you know what? I have a chance to open my school. I've always wanted to open my school. And even if I fail, the worst case is maybe I will lose all my money. That's it. Like, I'm not going to lose anything else. And so to me, that didn't seem like a huge deal. I'm sure, like, for somebody else in that situation, it would be, oh my God, I can lose all of my money. It's too risky. But in my case, I almost lost my son, and he almost lost his life. And so I felt like money is nothing. Money, if anybody told me, can you please give me all of your money and your son will keep his eye, for example, I would be like, oh my God, take all of my money. I didn't, now. This choice would be taken in 0.5 seconds, like instantly. There would be no doubt. If anybody asked me to give my eye to my son, I would do it also instantly. In my case, I was prepared to do this risky and difficult thing to open my school. But I believe that not many people are. And I believe that if we are better prepared to deal with possible failure, we will be able to be braver, and then we will commit to the course of action that we know deep inside is the right course of action. And so we are afraid of this failure, right? And why? Why are we afraid? I believe that we are afraid because, number one, we are afraid of the unknown. Because imagine if you failed already one business, are you going to be as afraid to fail another one? Probably not, right? Of course, it depends on the outcome of your first failure, but probably you will be like, okay, I can try it again. And maybe this time I will be smarter. And in my case, before this situation with cancer, I was not prepared, and then I was. Today, let's talk about what you're afraid of, okay? Let's talk about failure, how to deal with it, and instead of failure, we are gonna magnify it by 100 times, okay? Just like in the case with my son, this was a really traumatic experience for me, for him, for my family. I'm sure you understand it, right? So in my case, the danger of failing in a new business paled in comparison to that. But the thing is, the same techniques that we could use for dealing with trauma, we could also use to deal with any kind of failure. You start a business, you invite somebody on a date and they say no, or they say yes. We don't know. unless you try, right? But if you're afraid of failure, then it's not going to work. So if we adopt these ways of thinking, then we will be more functional, I believe, in the real life, and you will see why. And number two, we will be less afraid of failure, and as such, we will do more. We will expose ourselves to more situations where we can succeed, because every failure has the opposite side, right? It's like yin and yang. You can't have a failure without success. You can't have a possibility of failure without the possibility of success, right? So then you're exposing yourself to the situations where you can achieve success, whatever it means in your situations. So let's start with this simple statistic that I already mentioned, that actually only 8 to 12% of people who experience trauma then develop PTSD. And I'm sure that this is what you are worried about, because you think, okay, I will fail and I will never be able to recover. So if you knew that, okay, I will fail and then I will recover, I'm sure you would be more inclined to take your chance, right? And I'm not encouraging you to do physically dangerous things, like go to war, volunteer for something like that, engage in some extreme or dangerous sports. Just expose yourself to things that are uncomfortable, right? That can lead to failure, that is not dangerous actually for your life, okay? So 8 to 12% then develop PTSD, right? If you are like the majority, you are not gonna experience long-term mental consequences, okay? So that's number one. And among people who experience severe trauma, right? Could be loss of your family members, tragic events, captivity maybe, if you are captured by, I don't know, enemies or stuff like that. In that case, 20 to 25% people develop PTSD. So that is serious. However, as we're going to talk about later, are you really going to expose yourself to severely traumatic situations? Probably not, right? You shouldn't worry about that. So then let's assume that you would be in the case where 8 to 12, right? So let's say I could start a school, I could fail, and then I would be like, oh my God, business is horrible, business is terrible, it's not for me, I should never do it. I would, to be honest, it's hard to imagine that I would think of business failure as something serious. But yeah, I could see how that could be bad, right? It was stressful at some point, actually at several points in my business life, but none of them were strong enough to call them traumatic experiences. Actually, one of them, when my partner left, I would call it mildly traumatic. I still don't want to deal with other people. I don't want to hire people. I don't want to partner with people. And again, we will talk about the ways to deal with it. Next, out of those people who do develop PTSD, right, after 6 to 12 months later, right, most of these people resolve their symptoms on their own. No therapy, nothing. Just automatically, naturally, people deal with it. Then, if they don't, then 50% of those people can be helped during therapy. Okay, so now let's just sum it up quickly. So let's imagine 10% develop PTSD, right? Then out of them, the majority will resolve this. So let's say 100 people were traumatized, 10 of them will develop PTSD. Then out of those 10, the majority will resolve it automatically with no issues after 12 months. And out of those few, maybe a couple people who are left, at least half of them will be helped, can be helped. Okay, so whatever you are worried about in your life, it's probably not gonna be as, traumatic as you expected. So for example, in the previous video, I mentioned David Goggins' video where a guy was asking him about his situation. His wife was leaving him and he was like, oh, what should I do? What should I do? So then imagine if you have this approach, knowing what I just told you, you'd be like, okay, this is a traumatic event for me, okay, but in 6 to 12 months, I will recover. So I'm not likely to develop long-term traumatic disorder, And even if I am gonna do that, then I will resolve this issue naturally within a year. And then you're like, okay, let's start now. You're not gonna be like wondering. But here's the thing. The problem in those situations is that from what I read, again, I was reading this book and I was like, you know what? This reminds me of something. When people experience traumatic events, it looked to me very similar to the stages of grief. And let me remind you, they are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. And so many people, they actually get stuck in one of those stages, and we will talk about it a bit later. Because, so for example, denial. For many people, denial is actually a legit way of dealing with trauma, because trauma is very hard sometimes to accept, even because it completely shatters your worldview. And so because it does it, then it's very hard to even believe in what happened. And I will give you an example. When the war in Ukraine started, so imagine, I don't remember when it was like Tuesday, I think. And I'm already at work because I live in Japan and my parents in Ukraine. And so I get ready for my classes, and I get this voice message from my mother. And she says, kids, the war started. We hear explosions. And even now talking about this, I feel this slight physical stress thinking about that. But then, of course, as I start reading, and so I finish my usual working day, right? And then, of course, news. Open the news on my phone, start reading, oh my God, what's happening? And then at night, I go home after work, I go to bed, and then the next morning, I get up and I catch myself having forgotten about it. The next day, I get up, I'm like, oh yeah, this is Wednesday, this is such a nice, holy cow, my parents. And I believe this is denial, and I think it's natural. So I didn't have any intention of forgetting about it. I didn't want to like push it away. It just naturally happened. And a kind of similar situation happened when my son had cancer. Also, when you get up in the morning, when I was getting up in the morning, I didn't immediately realize what was going on. So let's say the first day when he was in the hospital already, I get up in the morning, and the first few seconds, I don't realize what world I'm living in now, right? I'm living in the world where my son might die, he is not at home, he's in the hospital, and I have to go there in the morning. Yeah, but I didn't realize it. So there is the lag, right? And so here's the thing. As I was reading this book, I realized that a lot of ways that people deal with trauma are related to the stages of grief. And so if you know the stages of grief, then just by knowing them, what's going to happen is you will be able to A, identify, and B, then deal with it much easier. Because now you know, oh, now I'm in denial. Okay, so the next step is going to be anger. And when you feel angry, you're like, oh, now I'm angry. Shit. And then, okay, now I'm angry, so the next step, I'm going to be bargaining. I'm going to be asking, why me? What could have I done differently, right? And if you know all of these naturally occurring stages, then you will be much stronger when it comes to dealing with them. It's like if you know your enemy, you can defeat your enemy, right? There are basically two types of coping strategies, right? Something bad happens, and then different people and in different situations, people choose two types of coping strategies. The first type is called task-focused. So it's basically you set a goal and you think about actions that you need to take to achieve that goal. For example, in this book, Stephen Joseph, he mentions a story of a North Irish police officer who was on a patrol one day, and his patrol car or jeep was attacked by an RPG, I assume, and he loses his arms, but he survives. And so then he was like, he immediately sets the goal to drive again. So as he's coming into consciousness in the hospital without his arms, he's like, okay, I'm gonna drive. How am I gonna do it? Okay, so he didn't think about, oh my God, poor me, what should I do? Oh, I lost my arms, so bad. No, he's like, okay, I lost my arms, but I wanna drive. How can I do that? And so he found a way, and then he managed to learn. But here's the thing. I think why he was able to do that is because he was inspired by a biography of another person who also was injured and who then became a pilot, one of the best British pilots in the Second World War. So he had an example, and so that's why I think he set his goal. But even without that, maybe this type of personality, he would find some kind of goal. And I've heard almost exactly same story from many Ukrainian soldiers. They were interviewed and they are missing limbs and stuff like that. And some of them are like, yeah, I don't have my leg, but my life is not ending. Like, I'm gonna put prosthetic leg and go on with my life. What? So what? It's like nothing for them. But others get broken. And so here's the thing. This is the task-focused approach. You have the goal and you go get it. Then another approach, coping strategy, is avoidant. And all of these and by the way, avoidant, it sounds like, oh no, just you're weak. No. In fact, these strategies actually work. However, the secret to converting your traumatic experience to growth experience, it's called post-traumatic growth, is balance between how much emotional load you carry. And I felt it really strongly when I was dealing with my son's cancer. So if you focus on it too much, it gets too much. But then if you try to forget about this, then it's not getting dealt with in your mind. And so there is this kind of balance that you need to maintain. It's painful. Of course it is. It's not going to be pleasant. Don't expect that, this is such a horrible thing happened to me, I'm going to deal with it at a leisurely pace. No, it's like you need to be ready to hurt and cry and suffer. But if you are the one in control of this, then you will be okay. This is my opinion, okay? Because I believe that the sense of control is one of the most important factors. And at least this is in my case, and I came to this conclusion by myself. And then as I'm reading this book, What Doesn't Kill Us, I find the same ideas mentioned by professional psychologists who actually deal with trauma. So yes, it's not only my opinion, it's also theirs. So here's the thing. So this avoidant type of strategy is another type. This is basically, you distract yourself, you may be in denial, right? Maybe you are thinking about what you could have done differently. And this is where I believe is very similar to the stages of grief. So somewhere in that loop of denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, the person gets stuck and they might spend a lot of time in that kind of mix, that whirlpool of emotions and stages of grief. And sometimes it could be healthy, like as I just told you, sometimes you need some space and time to deal with your emotions, right? So it could be too much. And so then, let's say denial could work if it's like taken in moderation, so to speak. Okay, so let's not bash people who avoid it, but let's not rely on this. Okay, and now let's talk about, so how do we deal with it? And in this book, the main kind of theory of why people experience trauma and why certain things are traumatic to some people while not traumatic to others. So you see, it's very individual. The same event can be traumatic to some people and completely fine to others. For example, in my case, the fact, for example, that the war in Ukraine started was not that traumatic. The fact. I felt that it would happen eventually. So for me, it was like, yeah. And so that's why for me, it was okay, right? But I'm sure for many, many other people, it was like, oh my God, what's going on? How is it possible? Their world was shattered. I remember one woman on the video in Kharkiv. Kharkiv is like very, very near to Russian border. And so that's the city that got hit the hardest. And she was cut with shrapnel. And she was like around 30 years old, so not old, not young. And she was like, oh, but why? Why? I don't understand it. Why? Why is this happening? So that's exactly traumatic question, right? This is the sign of that she was traumatized. And of course, many people would be traumatized in her situation. But that's my point, that the same event can be traumatic to some people and not traumatic to others. And the difference, why it's like that, is because of the worldview. So the theory of the shattered vase says that traumatic event, it becomes traumatic, so any event becomes traumatic when it shatters our perception of the world, our world image. So in our mind, we carry this image of the world. The world is like this, and then something happens that completely destroys this worldview. So in my case, for example, I had a set of beliefs of how people get cancer. So let's say, okay, there is some environmental factors. You can, let's say, smoke. You can do bad things, bad for your health. Maybe you feel stress. Maybe you are exposed to, I don't know, some environmental factors like radiation, right? But then when my son, who was 2 years old, had cancer, all of these beliefs just went out of the window. Because it's like, what the hell? Like, he didn't do anything wrong, right? That's my point, that events can shatter your worldview. Even good events. This is a very interesting point that is not mentioned in the book. But sometimes something good happens that you can't believe. And I don't know about you, but things like that happened to me. And it's like, oh my God, I can't believe it. It's a traumatic event, but maybe in a good way, right? But actually, I don't feel it like a good way. I always felt it a bit uncomfortable. Like some things happen better than you expect, or some unbelievably good thing happens. And in my case, I always feel like I was missing something, that I was missing some kind of correct image of the world. Like, why am I surprised by this, right? Shouldn't I know it? If this is a real thing that happens, why didn't I think of it before? And I have this, even in good times, I have this kind of, not disappointment, but this kind of feeling, okay? So anyway, now let's talk about how do we deal with this shattering of your world. So again, you might be worried about some kind of failure, right? So it might not even reach to the traumatic level, right? But in your mind, it might, okay? So you might think, oh my God, what if I will be traumatized by it? Okay. So let's imagine. For that case, what has to happen is reframing. And one of the classical examples of this reframing was by Viktor Frankl, the author of, oh my God, what's the name of his book? I will put it in the description. Anyway, The Man's Search for Meaning. I'm sorry. It's evening and I forget. Anyway, so one of his patients was a doctor whose wife died. And after 2 years, after she had died, this doctor comes to Viktor Frankl for help. He says, I can't deal with it. It doesn't get any easier. And so Viktor Frankl was like, okay, let's deal with it. And so then he asked this doctor, what do you think? Would it be easier if, say, you died earlier than her? How would it be for her? And then the doctor was like, yeah, that would be worse, because it would be very, very hard on her, much harder than it is on me. And then the doctor was like, you know what? Thank you. It helps. And so then the doctor recovered and probably accepted this situation that, so basically, because Viktor Frankl was able to reframe this situation as the better of two options, then he gave some kind of meaning. So he changed the meaning of this event. And by changing the meaning of this event, then the doctor was able. And now we are approaching to the very interesting topic of storytelling. So in this book, What Doesn't Kill Us, author is saying that one of the ways that we process events, and including traumatic events, is by making stories. So the events then will change the story we tell, and the story we tell will change our, he says personality, but basically it will change how we perceive ourselves. Okay? And so then let's imagine, right? I care about health. Okay? And so I could say, okay, I am the person who deeply cares about health and who will do anything in his power to make sure that his kids are healthy. And then my son gets cancer. And then it's like, oops, that's not me anymore. I can't say that anymore. So I have to rewrite my story. I have to rewrite. And in fact, like, my son had been sick before he had cancer, and I would go with him to the hospital. I would be the main person to deal with his health issues, and then he gets cancer. So then my story has to be rewritten. Yeah. And so then, of course, I can't rewrite the story without rewriting who I am, because I can't say that anymore. I can't say, oh, because I'm so good, my family is healthy. No, it's not true. I failed at that. And so this is one of ways how we deal with trauma, by rewriting, reframing our story. And to help with that, we need to do two things. In my case, I used journaling, writing down my thoughts and feelings. So I had two sections. So every day I would write what happened, facts, and number two, what I was thinking about, what I was feeling. And so then another way is just by communicating with other people. And then as you start telling your story, then you A, process your experience, B, you give meaning to what happened, right? And you might even get or make a new meaning for your life. And again, we will talk a little later about that. And then as you do that, then you rewrite your story and your personality. So then you accept and you build your new personality that is not in conflict anymore with what had happened. So basically, you become better because there was the world, the real world around you, and you built a wrong image of it. Let's say you ignored something, you didn't know something, and then something happened, or you didn't do something, and then something happened, and then it broke your inner world. And then as you rebuild your inner world, then you align it with the real world. And so in doing so, you make your inner world better. And better is more truth, right? Another point I wanted to mention is the meaning. Now, we need to align our inner world with what we value, what we want, what kind of person we actually are. Okay? And so many people, when they experience a traumatic event, then it completely changes their worldview. And in my case, I would say didn't do that much, but definitely it rearranged my values. So before my son's cancer, I was brought up in an environment of hard work. And I was growing up in the 90s, and if you didn't work hard in the 90s, as my parents did, it was very hard to have a decent living. So my parents would work very hard. My father is a doctor, and I think he derived his self-worth from his work. And so I saw how hard he was working, and he enjoyed it. And not even when he didn't enjoy it, he would still do it because that's what he was. And so ever since I started my working life, I had this belief that you have to work harder than everybody else. And I did. I was learning, I was working, I was achieving more than everybody else. And by doing so, it was actually giving me good results. I was promoted, and so it was working. And I was like, oh my God, this is great. I had several jobs, and at each job, I was better than most people at something. And I felt, oh yeah, this is what I am. And so then I remember, I think it was, so you remember in 2020, we started having lockdowns, yeah? And so my school was going into a lockdown, and it was happening as my school was changing owners. So the new owners come, and my work, as I've grown to become the head teacher at that school, my work also started increasing, because now there is this transition and the new owners want to change things, and they're like, okay, we need to do this and this and this and this. And who's going to do it? Me. And so I was working the hardest I've ever worked, and I felt great, because I was like, yes, I'm so important. This is great. And I was making decent money for, actually, no, not just decent, like almost no teacher in Japan makes that kind of money. And so I felt great. And yes, and so this working hard was such a big idea for me that I remember I volunteered to, let's say, work extra. And before we were going into the shutdown mode for, I think, 2 weeks, I remember I was just staying very late at work, just like fixing schedules and stuff like that. And then I had to go into the shutdown mode, so we go home and we have nothing to do. And that's when I had enough time to look at my son. And because I had enough time, I saw that he had cancer in his eye. And then it hit me. Had I worked harder, had I worked hard longer, maybe I would just not notice it and he would die. And so then it was like, oh my God, working hard is good, but it's not better than having your child. So it means this is not the most important. And so we all have values, right? And if you want to identify your values, go and search universal human values, and you will find a list of 10 values that you will basically, you can choose what you appreciate in life. And so ever since that time, actually my values ranking changed a bit. So the health and maybe the family relationships like went up, probably to the top level. And then work is the number 2 now. So that's my point, that these kinds of experiences, they change you, and you have to rewrite and change the meaning of your life, basically. And then you have to change your personality, and you have to realign your personality with what is actually important to you. So in my case, it was not a huge reshuffle. It was just like 2 values changed places. And yeah, I can't say that it completely changed my life. No, it didn't. I still work hard, but now when I make these choices, let's say, okay, should I work on this day or should I stay with my family, with my son, for example, then I usually it's much easier to choose now. Okay. But also I think there might be also this just timing. When kids are small, I don't think they need fathers being there so much, especially, let's say, at 2 years old. Before 2, it's mostly mother. What can father give a child? I don't know. Some fun, yes, but the majority of time is usually and probably should be spent with mother anyway. And then as the kid gets older, then the father's role is increasing. And so maybe that also influenced my situation. Yes, and the last point I want to mention is meaning. If you've missed my previous videos, how to find or develop or make meaning, and I don't think life has meaning, but life can have a purpose. So how do you find a purpose? It's like this. Imagine all-powerful being comes to you and shows you a button and says, look, if you push this button, then you will die, but one problem in the world will be changed. So whatever you want, one thing in the world will change. You can remove all wars. You can remove, racism and prejudice. You can make everybody happy. You can remove hunger. You can remove pollution, anything you want. Okay, but so you push the button, you will die, the problem will be solved. So the question is, your purpose in life is that problem that you would sacrifice your life. So what would be that problem that would be important enough for you to give your life away? And if you think like that, and it's not a quick answer, it's a simple method that will take you a long time to think about, because it's not a simple question. It's a simple but not an easy question, right? But once you approach figuring out this answer, what you will realize is you are spending your life on something, right? So every morning you get up and every morning you do something. Your life is limited, right? So your life is actually being sacrificed already. It's just, what is it being sacrificed on? Is it just to make a little money? Is it to watch some movies? Is it to spend time with friends? Which sometimes could be great. So basically, what are you spending your life on? And when you find that problem that would be more important than your life, then you will be able to start spending your life consciously on fixing that problem. And as I mentioned before, to fix any problem, you need materials, information, skills, and tools. And so if this problem is unfixable at the moment, which probably it is, right? You wouldn't, I want to fix my door and I will sacrifice my life for it, right? It's not like that. It's something great that so far has no answer. Let's say if everybody has no more cancer, some people would sacrifice their life for that. But now there is no such way to fix this. So then you would spend your life trying to find a way, find the information or skills or materials or tools that would make it possible. So that's how you find your purpose in life. And what researchers found is that people who have some kind of meaning and purpose deal with any adversity much easier, because then, as I mentioned with the coping strategies, they're like, okay, I have this purpose, I have this goal, how do I achieve it? And that helps you use the task-oriented coping strategies, not the avoidant, right? Oh my God, I lost my leg, but I still have a purpose, right? So then you're like, yeah, I don't have a leg, give me a prosthetic leg, I will go and keep doing what I'm doing. So it's much easier to deal with anything life throws at you if you have a purpose. Okay, so yeah, that's it from me for today. Actually, it came out better than expected. Maybe it's boring for you, I don't know, but for me it was interesting. Anyway, I will see you next time. Oh, by the way, wait, I will not see. I've created a website and I am going to start a newsletter. So please go to resilientfreedom.com and you can leave your email there and I will send you a newsletter. And the newsletter is going to be about exactly what we are talking about. How to be stronger, how to deal with problems in life, how to overcome obstacles, and stuff like that. Okay? And now, I'm signing off. I will see you next time.